Russia, its war against Ukraine and its continued violations of NATO airspace have been a focus of proceedings at the United Nations General Assembly that is presently underway. But one of the most notable remarks came not from the podium, as we were talking about earlier, but on social media, where President Trump wrote this, quote, "I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form." End quote. I mean, even the president's 2016 election opponent, Hillary Clinton, welcomed his statement. So now that the president appears to have shifted his stance, his view of the outcome of the war between Russia and Ukraine, what might we see? Joining me now to talk about this, retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Admiral Montgomery, welcome to Washington Watch. Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Were you surprised at all by the president's statement?
I was, only that I thought he'd eventually get to here. I think the president has landed in the exact right spot, which is to say that he gave Vladimir Putin a significant amount of time, numerous opportunities to see, join in a ceasefire with President Zelensky in Ukraine. And President Trump was disrespected by President Putin. After every meeting, Putin would go back to Russia and would immediately engage in significant cruise missile, hypersonic missile strikes on civilian personnel in Ukraine, and as well as engaging in military kinetic actions along the front line, ignoring the president's request for Vladimir to stop, ignoring the president's request to come to the negotiating table. I think President Trump gave President Putin all the wiggle room he could, and then he had enough.
Well, I also don't think time is on the side of the Russians. Because, I mean, they should have, if they could do this, they should have done a long time ago. But there's another aspect to this, Admiral, that the more information that comes out of what's happening in Ukraine, as you were just talking about how they've been targeting civilian populations, but also what they've been doing in the occupied regions. I've been talking to pastors who have been exiled, pushed out, their churches turned into police stations or military stations by the Russians, and their people scattered. There's a type of cultural genocide going on when it comes to Christians in those occupied regions.
No, you're exactly right. I spent a lot of time in Ukraine working with their troops and trying to do reform there. And I see exactly what you're saying. I'll go further. The abduction of 19,000 plus, maybe 20,000 plus Ukrainian children, their illegal adoption, or their placing them in homes, then eventually in the military to fight against Ukrainians. I mean, this is completely unacceptable behavior. And as you mentioned, the destruction of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church by the Russians. This is completely unacceptable behavior. It's in fact why President Putin has been indicted by the International Criminal Court, for these crimes against children and against humanity in Ukraine.
So, Admiral, let me ask you this question. With the President Trump now making these statements that suggest he's turned, as you said, you thought he would get here, he's here now. How might that affect how Europe responds in this conflict?
This is still, the president did not take his finger off of out of Europe's face. He continued to say what he should be saying, which is, you are the predominant provider of weapon systems. I'll allow my American defense industrial base to be the provider, but you need to buy these weapons. But what he said basically was, I'm going to let you buy what you need. And that's a change. There'll be even more weapon systems available. I think there's stuff coming through the system that the U.S. provided, bought years ago, that will be allowed to go. And there'll be both offensive and defensive weapons. But in the end, Europe's responsible. And then the second big part is Europe has got to get off of Russian oil and natural gas, their fossil fuel. That's what's paying for this war.
He brought that up yesterday in his speech.
That's right. And he told the Europeans, particularly Hungary, Slovakia, and Turkey are still taking quite a bit of oil and natural gas. Other countries are as well, but those are the big ones. And we all know China and India are the other two. And I think the president's going to handle China and India. Europe needs to handle Europe.
Well, and it's right there in their own backyard. I mean, it's to their benefit to shut down this Russian war machine, but yet they're continuing it by buying the oil and funding it.
So, and I'd split Europe up. There's a part of Europe, Poland and the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, that have done their job. They don't take anything from Russia. They spend 4 to 5% of their GDP on defense, more than the president had asked for initially, and what he would like to eventually see. They are good actors. Unfortunately, they're small in terms of economic productivity. We really need the Western Europeans, Spain, Portugal, Germany, France, UK, to do their fair share.
Admiral, just have about 45 seconds left. What do you think the timeline is? Do we see this war wrapping up anytime soon?
This is going to put a lot of pressure on Vladimir Putin. And he's got other pressures. He's lost 900,000 to 1 million people, including 250 to 300,000 dead. This is the lifeblood of a future Russia, and in a failed campaign. So he's got that pressure. He's got the pressure of mothers and grandmothers in Russia asking, why are we doing this? He's going to have severe economic pressure soon that won't be able to pay for the war machine. Yes, I think we've gone from years to high numbers of months, 6, 8, 10 months, before Putin's got to do something serious.
All right, Admiral Montgomery, thank you so much for joining us. Greatly appreciate your insights.